Good morning and welcome to a Jump Advisory recruitment discussion. This week we're going to hit a topic that has been an agenda topic for most businesses across the globe for the last 3 or 4 years, and it's becoming more and more important, and that's diversity and inclusion and equity. And what we're going to do is we're going to talk about how we can actually help clients and what processes we can put in to help clients develop and build from that. But as usual, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through some stats to have a look at what the market's looking like so we can get an understanding of the market. These stats, again, are being taken from a load of different places. So I'm going to put that data set on so you can have a look at that. So diversity inclusion stats. So diversity inclusion, it's an important fact for the majority of today's candidates. 76% report that diversity workplace is an important factor when evaluating a job or job offers from a company. That came out of Glassdoor. 57% of employers say that they update their recruitment strategy to build a more diverse workforce. That came out of Monster. A survey on Monster, though, said 30% of companies reveal that they do not have a form of DE&i strategy in place at all, and 87% said that diverse teams were making better decisions for their businesses. Companies that have diversity and inclusion policies but do not provide evidence of diversity and inclusion workplaces are viewed negatively by more minority groups, and that came out of Wilton in 2020. Diverse leadership and management has been shown to improve the company revenue by 19%. And from Gallup, only 40% of managers felt prepared to have a conversation about race with employees. McKinsey said 70% of companies think that remote working will allow them to increase their diversity in hiring, while Deloitte said millennials, 83% of them, are more likely to engage with a diverse company that's more inclusive. But we look at their gender diversity stats. 73% of business leaders say they are highly committed to gender diversity, and close to 50% say they are actively working to improve gender diversity, if we could say the words. Okay, and that came out of McKinsey's. 87% of companies say they were highly committed to gender diversity, and that was versus 56% in 2012. That was from the same report. And gender diversity companies are 15% more likely to notice higher financial returns. Looking at the LBGT diversity stats, same sort of things were there. 31% of LBGT respondents reported they have experienced discrimination and harassment in the last 5 years. Nearly half, 48% of transgender employees report experience of discrimination. And 67% of the LBG companies employees reported they have heard negative comments, slurs and jokes about their community. And it's the same with neurodiversity. According to one study of autistic professionals can be up to 140% more productive than the average employee, but they found that they were less employable. 87% of people wanted their company to be more inclusive of individuals with intellectual disabilities. And in the UK, the unemployment rate of autistic people is 78% higher than the average person, while in the USA, that number jumps to 85%. So it says there's a problem all the way around with all this. So this week I've got John Jacobs on. John is the founder and director of a company called Candidate X. And Candidate X is all about helping agencies and companies recruit in a more refined manner when it comes to DE&I. So John, welcome. Thank you very much for attending. I'd like you to sort of introduce yourself. I normally introduce my clients, but I'd like you to introduce yourself because I think you could do it so much more, such a better effort than I will, because you've got so much more investment into it.
Thank you, Howard. Thanks for the invite today. Very happy to introduce myself. I'm sure many of you will probably know my dad, Paul. So as they say, the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree when it comes to recruitment. I spent the first part of my career trying to ignore his advice, actually, funnily enough, Howard. But eventually I did end up in the recruitment industry, and I've worked for a company called Aston Carter in the city, and I was recruiting for techies in the early days. So when I started 2006 sort of time, and then I was there for a period of high growth. I then had my own agency business, and then about 3 4 years ago, me and my co-founders decided we wanted to do something about diversity and inclusion based on a whole load of situations that we found ourselves in, either personally affected or as recruiters being put into really tough spots. And I'm sure many people on this call can appreciate, the difference between a hiring manager, giving you a job spec and then saying, well, this is what I really want. And then all of the biases that come out through that process of cultural fits and alignments. And, we had some really shocking situations about, we don't want to hire people from Africa because of their communication skills, or we had a transgender candidate who had formerly worked for a business as a man, had went through a sex change and came back as a woman, and then they wouldn't take that person through to an interview based on that, and the team not following that person or not respecting that person. There was a huge amounts of bias involved, and I think a lot of companies hide behind unconscious bias. So we set about trying to do something about the processes involved, and try to take some of those biases out through systems and training, and that's kind of where I think Candidate X was born from, really.
So the question then is, who is Candidate X? I can understand where the idea came from, but what is your ideas? What are you trying to push now into the marketplace that will help with this, issue? Because it is a major issue right across the recruitment world.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we've decided to do is something, as I said, that's systems based change and training enabled. So where our expertise is really in that kind of upfront kind of search and engagement of talent. And as recruiters, we're in a really difficult spot. So what we wanted to do was to reduce bias. We never say remove it, because we're human beings and we are hardwired to have bias in us. So what we say is we reduce bias, and we want to provide equal access to opportunities to underestimated talent pools. So we say underestimated. You hear the word underrepresented quite a lot. But we feel that a lot of the market, the talent pools are underestimated. So it's about kind of an equal application process. So what we've built is it's a talent engagement platform. To all intents and purposes, as a conduit, it's a job board. We're about to go live next week, which is really exciting. What we've built is an AI-enabled redaction tool. So when the candidate applies for jobs, their CVs are redacted of identifying factors that could lead way to bias. So then the recruiter on the other side of the platform is reviewing CVs based on skills and experience alone. So it gives the candidates a much more confidence that they're going to be reviewed without bias. And we're training recruiters as well. So we have an e-learning program called Inclusive Recruiter, which takes the recruiters through the day-to-day aspects of their roles and where bias creeps in, whether that's in conversations with hiring managers or whether it's with conversations with candidates and CV reviews themselves, and try to kind of give them an immersive, relevant experience on that e-learning module to understand, where the biases may creep in and how to handle those things to give as much of an inclusive process as possible for all involved.
So there was a couple of sort of comments there that you started to sort of really sort of push out. Then one was about bias, unconscious bias, and by redacting people's CVs, that you reduce that. When you started to sort of build the platform, because we see this quite a lot, that we can put blind CVs to clients, etc. Does that truly remove the bias from the process? Or do you think recruiters can find a way around that process?
Yeah, I think if you're so inclined to hire in your image, or whatever that may look like, I think you can find ways of doing that. But what we do know is that recruiters take on average 7 odd seconds to skim read CVs, to filter. And the first things you're looking at as a recruiter are names, profile pictures, if there are profile pictures on the CV. You're looking at universities of study. You're looking at age and years of experience and things like this. And these are all factors that you make shortcuts on based on the requirements you're working to for your client. So I think by removing some of those key things from that first shortlisting process, you're able to reduce the bias quite a lot and give a much fairer opportunity. It's much more about that quality of process there. And then what the platform does is it reveals the candidates that you want to actually speak to and screen. And then you can have those conversations and do your screening. At that point, again, if you're so inclined to be biased, you will do that. It is not going to be a perfect solution. And I don't think there is one silver bullet solution to solve for every diversity and inclusion issue that there is. I mean, the top of this webinar, you just lots and lots of statistics are covering all sorts of that kind of diversity spectrum. It's going to be very hard to solve all of those with one product, but certainly within that kind of upfront screening piece, we think we can reduce the bias quite a lot. Plus, you can then take the screened candidates through to be redacted again to show hiring managers and send to clients. So you can send screen candidates in a redacted form to your clients, so they then get an unbiased filter of the CVs you're putting in front of them. So I think it's quite an interesting process to put out to the world. We're kind of hoping through this that we'll be able to win over the candidate population who maybe feel overlooked in the hiring process. Sending hundreds of applications to get a handful of callbacks. And there's various statistics. I mean, my co-founding director Sunil changed his name to Simon in his early career, and all of a sudden was getting lots of callbacks. So we know, and there's plenty of studies that have taken place about kind of minority ethnic names on CVs and the amount more applications they need to make to be seen and get callbacks. So, hopefully we can try to address some of those problems quite head on.
So if you looked at that then from a recruiter's point of view, if I said, right, okay, I've got a job that's come from a client, I want to now go out and find candidates, and my client has given me a specific sort of measurement with regards to DE&i, what he expects. Talk to me about how your products, or tell me more about your products and what they can do to actually help me, A, choose candidates, and B, send them to clients, because obviously there's the bias from our side, but there's also the bias when we get to the client point of view.
Yeah, there is, and I think that so a little bit on education, I guess, to the clients. It depends on what they're asking for, but we've seen this a lot with, and I'm sure people can relate to the PSL reviews and the RFPs and tenders that you go through at the moment, and the amount of questions that are pushed on down the supply chain to try and solve some of these deeper diversity issues that these organisations have had for many years of overlooking different cohorts of society. And I think it's about pushing back to organisations a little bit to say, we can't just have a female-only shortlist or a shortlist of only people from minority ethnic backgrounds. I think you're kind of then looking at real short-term knee-jerk reactions to try and solve much deeper problems, and you're kind of using discrimination to solve discrimination. It's to me, it doesn't make much sense. I think there's a level of education that we try to equip recruiters with to be able to handle those conversations in a much better way. But then there's the subject of equity and making sure that historically overlooked populations of individuals are given now a fair chance, and that means probably over making sure that you are present and being proactive to those communities. So what we try to do as Candidate X is we form partnerships with different demographic groups. So whether that's within the LGBT community or we've got a client in Canada at the moment who's looking at solving problems with the Indigenous community that they have there and trying to build bridges there. So we try to take these siloed, diverse groups, which are doing great works for their own community, and try and act as a bit of a glue between them so that we can distribute opportunities to these groups to encourage applications and boost your chances as an organization of having a more diverse shortlist. It just doesn't necessarily equate that you will make a diverse hire. And I think that as long as you've got a provably fair, auditably fair process to get to that point, I think that's absolutely fine to hire, the white middle class male, if that's the right person for the job, as long as you have been really open and transparent about how you've tried to attract diverse talent, because a lot of this is about a mid to long term plan to try to solve some of these problems. And I don't think you can take one job in silo and solve just by one job. I think it can be quite tokenistic to do that. So I think it's about the bigger picture these organizations have, and as recruiters we have to make a bigger impact within these underrepresented communities and try to look at a kind of more mid-term to long-term strategies to solve some of these problems rather than on a per job basis.
So that means measuring the amount of people that you put through the process to ensure that there is a diverse community within that and it's hit the diversity to measures. Where does that measure start and stop? Because I've always told, is it the amount of candidates that you put through, but is it the amount of candidates that you actually review before you get to putting those candidates through that process? Where do clients take that measure from?
Well, I mean, clients who are measuring this are already ahead of the curve, if I'm honest. I think most organizations really struggle to even understand the diversity makeup of their employees within the four walls of their organization, right? So they may have a good grasp on gender and ethnicity, but I think it's a bit of a stretch to say that they would know about the disabilities necessarily, particularly invisible disabilities, mental health issues, sexuality, all of these like caregiving status, things like this, where people are looking after elderly relatives or younger people. So I think that there's a struggle already for organizations to understand the insights around the diversity makeup of their own business. Now, you extrapolate that out to the talent market, most companies have no real clue. So this is really something that I think recruitment agencies can get ahead on, because if you as a recruitment business are able to really kind of, I guess, bottle the talent market in that way, and then feed insights back to your organizations that you recruit for, I think you're really going to get ahead. So as a recruitment company, it's challenging to understand the diversity makeup of these people that are coming in or interested to the jobs. You can get a good grasp on gender and ethnicity, but beyond that, it's quite tricky. And this is something that we're trying to solve for at Candidate X, because we ask our job seekers in the process 11 different categories about what makes them, right? So how they identify as a human being. And then we anonymize that data with the mindset of feeding insights to the end hiring businesses to tell them, who is and probably more importantly, who isn't applying to their jobs. And going further than that, you can start to understand real sentiment around what candidates think about a brand. Would you want to work here? Do you see yourself working there? And if not, why not? And some of those interesting sentiments that come out of those conversations are really, I think, things that hiring businesses just have no real clue on at the moment. And I think this is something that recruitment businesses can really get ahead on and give them an competitive edge to go and win more business around. So it's an interesting thing to be focused on. But you have to be very careful, obviously, when dealing with data and how you're using it. There's a big ethical, moral conversation around that. So you need to be really transparent about what you're trying to do with that. As long as it's for the greater good, I think most candidates now are used to answering to a degree a lot of these questions, and it's about getting over the mistrust of candidates who, at the moment in application process, are getting asked all these sorts of questions, but are asking, why do you need to know, or is it going to be used against me? If it's not transparent, then I don't think you get that data.
And I think that's the transition that the whole world's got to go through, isn't it? That you've got that transition of trusting what people are saying to you, and then having no subconscious or unconscious bias about that. So if we turn to the recruitment market specifically and look at recruitment as a whole, why is it important then for recruitment businesses that they are DE&I centered in their approach, and why does it matter so much?
Well, I mean, we touched on it just a second ago, but I think that increasingly hiring businesses are looking to their recruitment supply chain to boost diversity on their talent pools, right? I think there's a statistic around 50% of employers requesting diverse shortlisted candidates. So, there's whole sections of D&I related questions now that are a familiar part of, PSL reviews. So I think if you're an ambitious agency, you're probably looking at that and thinking, this isn't going to go away. and you're probably looking at this as a really a non-negotiable cornerstone of both how you do your talent acquisition as a recruitment business, but also as internal hiring, as hiring talent to come and work within your business. And actually, I think the big brain idea here is about turning these things into a business development strategy, so that you're in the position to go out and win business with diversity and inclusion as your kind of opening gambit into the market, given that more companies are looking at this as a key differentiator. So I think it's a competitive advantage for companies. And there's various things that you can do as a recruitment business to get ahead on this. And as I said, I don't think it can be tokenistic. I think this has got to be really well thought through. You should have a strategy from the top down. And we're training recruiters to be inclusive. I mean, training is just one element of what recruitment companies should be doing at the moment to showcase how inclusive they are as a business. So I think it starts with a real clear strategy for companies, really understanding and defining what those objectives look like, and making sure that they're kind of widely understood by the entire business. But if you haven't got those, everyone's coming at this from a different start point, and I think you've got to understand what when you put these strategies together, having it as a collaborative thing within your team, to making sure you've got people within your business at all different levels contributing to that conversation, and then making sure there's buy-in across the business to do these things. And that could be forming a DE&i committee as a business, an internal committee. That's something that's, I think, quite important from an internal view, and it's an inside out and an external in sort of view. Making sure your website is bursting with this kind of DE&i energy. I do a lot of work with recruitment business, and there's a real kind of difference between certain companies in terms of how they present themselves out to the world. And I think that level of authenticity and transparency on your website is really crucial, because companies are looking for this, as well as talent to come and work for your business. They're looking at these things because it's important to them. And actually, and that's a point we haven't raised yet, but Gen Z and the next demographic after, I think it's Alpha, the next one's coming through, feeling really old now. There's statistics around the fact they place inclusion and belonging as just as important as salary when they're looking for jobs. So I think companies that don't embrace this are going to get left behind, and it may be an erosion over time, but I think you have to be thinking around inclusion first strategies now to kind of future-proof your business in terms of winning business and being competitive, and being current and modern, and speaking to the demographics that are out in the world now.
So first mover advantage has obviously gone a long time ago on this marketplace. So do you see a big range of differences between recruitment agencies that are doing DE&i now and doing it well, and those that aren't? And what does actually good look like from a recruitment point of view when you start to implement DE&i?
Yeah, brilliant question. Listen, I don't necessarily agree that first mover advantage is gone. I think that you can create your own. You can create your own brand image, and we call it DE&i brand equity as a business. And I think that that's very personal to how an organization presents itself to the world, and not coming across tokenistic. And I think those things can be. Doesn't really matter if other people are doing these things. I think this is absolutely fine for businesses to do now, and not think that they're going to be falling behind. I think there's never a better time to start, really, if you haven't done it already. In terms of what good looks like, you have to take in some respects, you have to take off your, the old school business mindset of revenue at all costs hat off for just a second. Because if you're going to make a real impact within diversity and inclusion, you need to be looking at these long-term goals, and that might mean spending time, money, and action on things that don't immediately result in bottom line profit. And what I mean by that is, you might, as an organization, need to build bridges with different communities. So say, for example, you work in, let's say, an industry that's historically overlooks certain parts of society. Let's look at construction as an example. You know, very male-dominated environment. So, as a business, as a recruitment business, you're looking at your client base and going, "There's a real pain for your clients, because you need to hire more people from more women and people from different ethnic minorities, as well as other things." But you know, two key parts there. So what can you do to solve some of those headaches for your clients? Can you go out and build partnerships um, with these parts of society, and that may be kind of partnering with schools or educational authorities? It might be partnering with charities and not-for-profits. Can you sponsor events in those spaces? Can you be on panels? Can you turn up on webinars? Can you be a thought leader? Can you write papers on the importance of that industry and put yourself out there as a kind of a think tank on the subject? Because these things are investment in time and money and energy, and you might not immediately see the rewards, but over the course of time, if these are part of your strategy, you will, and you'll start to win business based on these activities. And you know, if you are able to build a cohort of candidates from these categories, you're going to have a very marketable USP that your competitors don't have. And I think that these will be crucial in kind of satisfying your current clients, but also opening up new opportunities and being able to really scale your business with this as the kind of snowplow at the front of it. So there's lots you could be doing to get ahead in this space, but it is a mid to long term view that you need to take to how you get there and how you go along that journey.
So, I mean, as we always say, the recruitment market is massively competitive. It's really competitive. And what you're saying there is that Candidate X can give your agency an edge when pitching to clients based on certain things. So talk to me about that edge that you think it will give, and how long before that edge is blunted because it becomes the norm.
Okay, so look, immediately what Candidate X is able to do is to give you an inclusive process to be able to talk about very loudly and proudly on social media, on your website, in your client pitches, telling your current clients, telling your current database candidates. You know, we recruit inclusively. We have a process which you redact CVs, and it means that you will be considered onto the shortlist without any level of bias involved. And that's quite an important thing to be able to tell the market. And then in combination with that, the learning product, we're able to certify your recruiters. You actually get a certification, a credential, a badge, something again, which you go out to the market to say, our team or I as an individual recruiter have been inclusively trained. Anyone who is in the market, talent pool or client base, this is how I go about my process proudly. And so you get a level of certification then across the business, which you can talk about, again, putting on your website, putting across social media. These types of things are going to help with competitive edge and winning new proposals and pitches and the various things that go with that. I think we're a long way off that edge being blunted, if I'm honest, Howard. I think the level of adoption, there might be, to be an early adopter is, you know, it would be wonderful, but I think the bulk of the market will take years to come to this, because ultimately what we're saying is we're asking recruiters to take just that little bit more time up front to consider the CVs without the shortcuts, right? So that 7 seconds I spoke about a little while ago, we're kind of removing that. We want recruiters to take a little bit more time to actually read the CV and spot who's right and interesting for a conversation without making those mental shortcuts. So I think that level of process change needs to be, you really have to desire to want to do something different in this space and to stand out, I think, to be able to adopt something like that. We're not saying taking, you know, huge amounts of time, but we take just a little bit more care and effort to make sure you're reviewing CVs without bias. I think that could take a little while to be fully adopted across the piece. But I think we're seeing hiring businesses start to demand these things. So our competitors are doing redaction, but within applicant tracking systems, in the kind of candidate in the hiring managers systems, rather than upfront to the engagement piece. So, we have something quite unique that can do that to the wider talent pool, rather than the candidates who have already kind of gone through and applied to the jobs, if you see what I mean. So I think it's going to be a bit of time till we get to a kind of a mass adoption on this. So be a little while before that edge is blunted, I think.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because this is not just a recruitment sort of process that recruitment agencies need to catch up with. It's also a client process that clients need to
Yeah.
catch up.
Mm-hmm.
And you alluded to early on as well, and we've all probably experienced those clients that say, I'd like someone to come and work for me, but they must have, stubble, or I'd like someone to come and work with me. Have they got the right name? They sort of hinting at that. So what do you do when you have companies who say, we are a diverse business, we're not racist, we're not sexist, we look at everyone the same, we treat everyone fairly, we don't need to invest time and money into DE&I, when really they should be investing? What do you say to those type of companies? Because that's probably the objection that we're going to get from a lot of clients. How do we overcome that?
Yeah, and you're always going to get people who are cynics, I think, on the subject, and people that don't believe they have problems. I think you'd want to be data. You want to understand the data, and so one person saying that, but is that the view of their entire business? And I think this is about understanding what that company is doing and kind of how it is perceived from an outside perspective. So I think that's where we will be able to kind of push back on companies who are saying those types of things. So you need to be, doing research and being equipped to be able to have those conversations. Because if you look at, say, their LinkedIn profile or their websites or their social media presence, you can start to see whether they're using their real staff in those images that they're putting out to the world. Or do they look visibly diverse? Maybe, maybe not. Can you see their board? Are the board diverse? What does Glassdoor say about about what it's like to work there as a business, and all of these things? Because I think you can start to use some of that data to push back to companies to say, well, look, this is what we perceive, and if we perceive this, then the candidate market will also be perceiving these things as well. So I think you've got to go into those conversations with a little bit of an edge, and plus for companies that are over 250 staff, they'll have a gender pay gap a report as well, which they have to do by law. So you can garner a lot of information around what companies are doing on the back of that, and most of these companies still have a pretty large, particularly the traditional, let's say financial services, insurance, construction, these types of big gender pay gaps still. Even if the gender splits are around 50-50, there's still a big gender pay gap because most of the men are in senior roles, and a lot of the females are kind of in the mid to senior levels or lower levels of the business. So there's a disparity with salaries there. And so I think it's about education, sending that back to the organisations who are pushing back on those things, and also I'd say that just because somebody or an organisation or as a recruitment business you've done one piece of training or you've done one or two of these things within the D&I space and you don't immediately see that kind of return, I don't think you could say it's a one and done approach. I said it's not. There's no one silver bullet, but it's a bit like saying, I've read one book, I'm not going to read another, or I've had a meal, I'm not hungry, I'm never going to eat again. It doesn't make much sense. You've got to have a strategy where you are constantly working on these things, and just because you've done one training session, you can't just go we've had a training session, we're done. I think it's about making sure that you are constantly doing those little things that all add up as part of a wider strategy, and it's a complete work in progress constantly.
So we talk quite a lot about when we're training and developing people that it's not a one and done process, it should be a continual process.
Yep.
And I constantly see and hear that the market is very much from a DE&I point of view, a tick box exercise. So from a recruiter on the tools or on the tools everyday point of view, how do they become more diverse when writing job adverts, writing search strings, evaluating CVs? As these are the initial filters, I suppose we're the initial filter for the clients before they get that shortlist. How do we become better at that?
Well, I think it starts with how you take the job requirements in the first place. Really understanding from the hiring managers and the businesses, what are the absolute must-have skills? Forget the nice to haves for a second. What are the key skills that really are needed for this job for somebody to be able to do it. And I think it's really starting around those things in terms of how you go about your search, because it's the small things that around the cultural fit aspect of things that you can, where the bias starts to come in. It's about the socials after. Does this role require to take clients out, for example? Does this role require you to be in the office 5 days a week? Does and it goes on, and it starts to kind of really kind of whittle it down so that you end up kind of hiring homogenously based on previous success stories within that business. So I think as recruiters we are in a hard spot with that, because we typically on a no win no fee basis, right? So I think it's about education back up to the organization that's giving you the role to understand what those key skills are, and then go out to the market with those things. There's lots of tools that you can invest in on the market around gender decoding for job descriptions, for example. There's various other tools that you can use around job boards like ours, where you can start to put jobs out into places where maybe these organizations aren't looking at the moment, to start to uncover talent in different places. So there are things you can do, but I think it starts with that conversation to the hiring business to understand those key things. If I were able to present you, Mr. and Mrs. Client, with a short list of candidates that can do these core 5 things, would you be interested in interviewing these people? And you're not talking about anything then that could lead to bias to that point. And maybe it's using questions also in how you speak to those candidates in screening to rule in or rule out based on those key things, rather than anything else involved in that part of the process.
See, it's interesting, isn't it? Because we were at LinkedIn a couple of weeks ago, and they were talking about looking at the adverts that they have on their platform now. So you're going to be competing to that platform to a certain degree, and they were saying how many of those adverts are written unknowingly by recruiters are full of bias. And what they're worried about is that the more that AI comes into the marketplace, then the more the AI will create unconscious bias, because it's only searching on what the search string the candidate or the consultant puts into the piece of AI that they're using. So how do you overcome that? What do you do to overcome that? Because I can understand how to rewrite a job spec or take a better job spec, etc., etc. But when we start to search, and as we get further and further into that AI market, more of it will be done by automation. How do we ensure that that doesn't become the bias point that people will go at?
Yeah, it's a really tough one to answer, to be honest, because ultimately it depends on what's being fed to that particular AI. And there's that famous example that Google, I think it was Google, maybe it was Amazon actually, who pulled the plug on their AI recruitment tool because they just fed it a load of previous hires that they'd made that they considered successful in their jobs, superstars in their jobs. And what the AI started to work out was that 90% of them were men. So it started to filter out women on the basis of that, of what it had been told was good. And I think a lot of these AIs can be quite dangerous in that regard, based on what it's been fed. All I can really speak to is the AI that we use, and that is very specifically about taking out identifying factors from CVs that could lead to bias. You're not going to get any sort of kind of swerve away from those things there. So yeah, it's tricky. I mean, it's very hard to answer because there's AI is just it's everywhere at the moment. I think you just need to have a level of care when you go through, if you are going to use an AI or a chat GPT or whatever to build job descriptions, that you are ensuring that you're telling the AI to gender decode it, make sure that it's unbiased, and try to really give it that kind of criteria for it to spit out a spec that is as much as it that has at least thought about those things in the first place. But it's a tricky space at the moment, I have to say.
It's a really interesting one, because obviously every recruitment agency fears litigation as the world becomes more litigation crazy. I do know that one of the big food delivery companies had a piece of automation that was doing all their scheduling for people coming into their scheduling. And it took them a while to realise that that was also being discriminative against certain people within the marketplace.
Mm.
And the AI started to get better and better, and it was then taking people out that could do certain pieces of jobs, and they got taken to court over that. And it was a really interesting sort of piece of legislation in the States that came out that's saying that piece of software actually was creating bias constantly all the way through. So it's a really tricky marketplace to be sort of
It,
in. And from a recruitment place, and obviously you're the frontal sort of, so you're the spearhead or the snowplow as you described it, point where you're going in and driving this. So how would we avoid that type of litigation if we are, doing what we believe to be best from a DE&I point of view?
yeah, I mean, it's a challenge. I just think that AI should be a part of potentially what you do and how you go about your strategies to deliver candidates. There is a time saving thing. I think that's why most people would look to use it. But I think it's fine to be used as long as it's kind of a part of a toolkit that you are using as an organization. I think if you're in a position where you can really evidence your D&I progress and success from different spaces, like, showcasing, you know, inclusion training, highlighting diverse candidates and placements that you've made successfully, featuring your, as I said, your company's D&I commitments and committee and what you're doing as a business, providing regular updates to your clients, candidates, stakeholders about what you're up to within D&I. I think you kind of create this kind of positive outlook of inclusion practice that you have as a business. And I think these stories start to talk really loudly to the market. So I think you start to minimize the risk of, an AI doing something like that. I think there's a holistic approach you need to take to all of these things. And I think if you're being transparent, you're accountable to what you're saying you're going to do, you're building trust, your values are very loud and clear around diversity and inclusion, I think you'll be absolutely fine. So, yeah.
So hopefully, I mean, to me, there's so much to learn and take on board from this, and so much to sort of drive forward. So the people that are on this sort of webinar now, what would you say to them is the next steps that they should take? And if they're interested in Candidate X, how do they get in contact with you?
Yeah. So look, we have a number of products. As I mentioned, we've got the e-learning product, which has been live since April. We've certified about 400 recruiters so far, and a mixture of staffing agencies, in-house talent teams. We've had companies like Meta and Boeing, Zoopla have put their internal talent teams through the training. Testimonials have come back, have been really, really, really positive. Lots of people learning things about themselves that they didn't necessarily know, and how these businesses are now putting this out to the world is they're getting already good returns on that. So that's a product that is ready to go. You can find that on our website, candidatex.co. Our job board is going live next week. It's been 2 years of building, so I'm very excited about it. We're just sorting out the last few bits and bobs on there from a bugs perspective, but we're going live shortly. So as of next week or maybe the week after, you'll be able to take job postings out on Candidate X, start to put your roles out to the world, and use this redaction technology to be available to you straight away. And we also have what we call D&I Pulse, which is a survey which we do as an internal anonymized survey with you and your teams to understand where you're at as a business from an inclusion perspective. What's the sentiment of your team? What do they say about how inclusive you are as a business? And you can use that as a really nice starting point to kind of formulate some of these bigger strategies that we spoke about as well. So again, that's something that's available now to do. So you head onto our website, but I'll share my my contact details after this, and if anybody would like to get in touch, very happy to have a conversation and demo anything you'd like. It's all show and tell stuff that we can give you.
John, yeah, as I say, to me, it's a really fascinating marketplace. And we've done D&I projects before with different people on there, and it's a different conversation talking about then how to actually combat it and how to work with it, rather than just talking the subject itself, because that's the bit that recruiters need to get better at. For any recruiter on here, if you want to go onto LinkedIn, just type in candidate X and you'll be able to find John and the rest of the business and working from there. Next week we were going to be talking about the no compete law that is going to change. And that's going to be really critical to recruiters, not only for people working for you, but obviously if you're giving candidates across to clients, so you have a no compete that candidates can't be taken from anywhere else, etc. However, I'm trying to find a new person to come and to give that discussion, because my solicitor who was going to do it has been called into court for next Wednesday, so he unfortunately can't. So I'm going to do that. If I can't find somebody, we'll do something else next Wednesday, but we'll be definitely doing something. JJ, thanks very much for your time. It's been much appreciated.
Pleasure.
Ladies and gents, thanks for your time for coming. Again, if you want to get hold of JJ, find him on LinkedIn. Look at candidate.co. It's not .com, it's .co, just in case. Okay, and we look forward to seeing you all next week. Thank you very much. Cheers, John.
Thank you, everyone.